The truth was never supposed to escape those walls, and yet the moment King Charles lowered that pen, something far more dangerous than a signature was unleashed. This wasn't just a royal decision. It was a line drawn in silence, a line that would cut through blood, history, and everything that once held a fractured family together. And here's where it gets unsettling, because what looked like a quiet administrative act was anything but quiet. It was controlled, calculated, and carried out behind sealed doors where even the air felt heavy with consequence. No cameras, no witnesses beyond a chosen few, just a father and a monarch standing on opposite sides of the same irreversible moment. When Charles entered that restricted room, he didn't greet anyone. That silence wasn't protocol, it was pressure. Two constitutional advisors stood frozen. The keeper of the privy purse, watching every move like history itself was being written in real time. And at the center of it all, a sealed folder, ordinary on the outside, devastating within, because everyone in that room already knew what those pages contained, and more importantly, what they would destroy. Not just a title, not just a role, but a bridge that had somehow remained standing despite years of public fractures. And then came the detail that changes everything. This wasn't about stripping Prince Harry of something he was actively using. No, this was about erasing possibility, about closing the last invisible door that still allowed hope to exist. For years, there had been ambiguity, space, silence that could be interpreted as forgiveness waiting to happen. But this document, it erased ambiguity with precision. It didn't just say not now, it said not again. And when Charles reached Harry's name, he stopped. Not for effect, not for drama, but because something inside him hesitated. For just a second, the monarch disappeared, and the father remained. His grip tightened, his expression shifted, and in that pause, something fragile almost survived. But then it was gone. The signature followed. Clean, final, unquestionable. What makes this even more unsettling is what happened immediately after. Because this wasn't symbolic. This wasn't a statement for headlines. This was a system-wide purge. Internal records, ceremonial lists, protocol documents, every single trace of Harry's formal presence inside the royal machine removed. Quietly, efficiently, almost surgically. And staff were warned say nothing or face immediate dismissal. Think about that. Even silence was being controlled. But here's where the emotional fracture deepens. Because this wasn't born overnight. This wasn't one decision sparked by one event. No, this had been building. Every interview, every accusation, every moment where private tension spilled into public space. Charles had been balancing something impossible, being a father who forgives and a king who cannot afford to ignore. And eventually, those two roles collided. Meanwhile, Prince William stood on the edge of that collision. When he read the summary, he didn't react immediately. That silence again, but not the same silence. This one carried recognition, understanding, and something heavier, acceptance. Because William didn't just see what was happening, he saw what couldn't be undone once it began. He knew this wasn't just about Harry. This was about the future of the crown itself. And then there's Queen Camilla watching it all unfold with a perspective no one else had. She had seen Charles carry the weight of this decision long before the document ever existed. She had watched the exhaustion, the restraint, the quiet attempts to hold something together that was already breaking. So when she asked if he was certain, she already knew the answer. She just needed to hear it spoken out loud. But the most dangerous detail? It wasn't the signing. It wasn't the removal. It wasn't even the silence that followed. It was the date, a handwritten note, almost invisible, but not insignificant, because that date matched a private royal ceremony, one that was never meant to matter beyond that room. And suddenly, it did. Suddenly, it became the missing piece, the moment where something crossed a line no one could uncross. Because what if this wasn't just about years of tension? What if something happened that night? Something that forced Charles to stop waiting, stop hoping, and finally act. What happened inside that private Windsor ceremony wasn't loud, dramatic, or explosive on the surface, but it didn't need to be. Because sometimes the quietest moments carry the most dangerous consequences. The room had been sealed from public view, carefully controlled, filled with familiar faces who believed just for a few hours that history could pause, that tension could be suspended, that grief could unite what conflict had fractured. It was meant to be a moment of remembrance. Instead, it became the moment everything finally broke. Charles allowed Prince Harry into that space in the most limited way possible, a secure video connection. Controlled, contained, temporary, that detail matters. Because it shows something crucial. Despite everything, despite the interviews, the distance, the public fallout, there was still a thread. Thin, fragile, but still there. And Charles made a decision in that moment that would later haunt him. He trusted that thread. He spoke carefully, every word measured, not as a king addressing a subject, but as a father allowing his son to hear what very few were ever meant to hear. Plans concerned the future, the transition of power, the quiet mechanics of how the monarchy would survive the next phase. These weren't public talking points. These were internal truths. And before the call ended, Charles did something even more revealing. He asked Harry to keep it private, not as an order, as a request. And Harry agreed. That agreement didn't just carry words. It carried expectation. It carried the last remaining piece of trust. 48 hours later, that trust collapsed because somewhere far from Windsor, an overseas media producer received something they should never have had: phrases, details, exact language that could only have come from that conversation. Not general leaks, not vague summaries, specific wording, unique expressions, the kind of detail that doesn't escape by accident, the kind that points to a source. And when Prince William saw those words, he didn't need confirmation. He recognized them instantly. The same phrasing, the same tone, the same structure his father had used just once inside that room. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. Not confusion, not doubt. Certainty. Charles reacted differently. No anger, no outburst. Just a question repeated again and again. Was there another explanation? That repetition matters because it reveals what he was really doing. Not investigating the leak, but searching for a reason not to believe it. And when the security assessment finally traced the path back toward Harry's circle, that search ended. This wasn't just a breach, it was exposure. It meant private royal planning timelines, transitions, responsibilities had slipped into the hands of people who could use it, twist it, weaponize it. And suddenly, this wasn't about family anymore. This was about vulnerability at the highest level of the monarchy. That's when Charles made the call. Not immediately, not impulsively, but decisively. He summoned Harry to one final meeting. No advisors, no witnesses, no safety nets, just father and son with everything stripped away except truth and whatever version of it each one believed. The setting wasn't a palace chamber. It was Clarence House. And that choice wasn't accidental because Charles didn't want to begin as a monarch, he wanted to begin as a father. But the moment Harry entered and saw him standing waiting, not welcoming, that illusion collapsed. This wasn't reconciliation. This was reckoning. Charles placed the report on the table. No speeches, no build-up, just one question. Direct, unavoidable, and Harry denied it. Not softly, not carefully, firmly, but then something else happened, something far more revealing than the denial itself. The anger came. Fast, sharp, defensive. He didn't just reject the accusation, he attacked the system making it, accused the palace of doing the same thing for years, of playing its own hidden game. And suddenly, the room wasn't about a leak anymore. It was about years of resentment crashing into years of restraint. Charles didn't step back. That's critical, because this was the moment everything could have shifted. If he softened, if he hesitated, if he chose the father over the king, this story might have ended differently. But he didn't. He held his ground and said something that closed the door completely. Grievance does not excuse betrayal. That sentence didn't just respond to Harry, it defined the outcome, because from that moment, there was no path back through explanation, justification, or emotion. Only consequence. Harry's anger broke into something deeper. Pain, real, unfiltered, exposed. He asked the question that had been sitting beneath everything: was he ever meant to return? Or was he being tested all along? And Charles answered with a truth that was both honest and devastating. He had hoped for a return, but trust had been broken too many times. And then came the moment that sealed everything. Charles removed his signet ring and placed it on the table. Not thrown, not slammed, placed, a quiet gesture, but loaded with meaning, identity, authority, finality. He wasn't arguing anymore. He was deciding. Harry left before it ended. That matters, because it means the conversation didn't resolve. It didn't close. It fractured. And once that door shut, Charles didn't wait. He called for the document, the final instrument, the one that would transform everything that had just happened into something permanent. And when he returned to that desk, to that same pen, to that same name, there was no hesitation left. Because by then, this was no longer about what had happened. It was about what could never be allowed to happen again. And the most unsettling part, even after everything, after the confrontation, the decision, the decree, one question still hangs in the air, unanswered and dangerous.